All right, we're gonna jump into the booth and you're gonna see me in action spraying our SPI epoxy primer. This is all fully loaded with tips and tricks, anything and everything you need to know about epoxy primer.
Maiden day, baby. Woo-wee.
All right, so we're in the booth. We're here with the 1968 Caprice project. This is one of my personal cars. So give you guys an idea, this hood, I ended up buying a second hood for my car. The first hood had so much cancer that we weren't even aware of. Majority of the cancer was behind here, the reinforcements. Cancer? Yeah, so look, you know, we use the word cancer, but cancer is rust. That's what we refer to in the industry, because it's like when we talk about rust, we talk about it like cancer. Like, you can treat it all you want, it always comes back. So 9 out of 10, it's better off cutting it off, that piece of corroded metal, and welding a new piece of metal. So what was going on with my other hood is that I had the hood body worked, it was perfect, we were ready to paint it. I had it in primer and we noticed 1 or 2 little bubbles, and I grinded the bubble down, it was clean metal. And I had a little pinhole, and then after the fact I grinded it down, cut a square out, and I actually had cancer or rust growing behind the reinforcement, living between those 2 layers and eating the sheet metal from the inside out. So I said to myself, you know what, let me just get another hood. So we ended up bringing this hood from San Jose, California. We crated it over, we did body work, we stripped it to bare metal. Well, we stripped it to bare metal first, then we sprayed epoxy primer. So one of the things that I love about this epoxy primer, this already has 3 coats of epoxy primer. If you guys notice, there's a little bit of pitting here, some grind marks. So we sanded this whole hood down with 220, and it's already filled in a good amount of these grind marks from the stripping process. Now what I'm gonna end up doing is spraying another 3 coats of epoxy primer, and then we're gonna end up letting that sit for 24 hours, give or take. We notice that letting it sit for a whole day, it becomes way better than trying to work on it real quick. Because if you try to spray it and then work on it within, let's say, the next day or 8 hours or 12 hours, it's gonna end up gumming up your paper. So you wanna let it sit, and the manufacturer also recommends 24 hours. So here we ended up spraying all this. We're gonna end up spraying another 3 coats. I'm gonna spray it with my 1.4 Wada. It's real important not to spray this like 2K primer. You don't wanna spray a lot of this material, but we wanna spray all this, get into all this stuff. So later, I can come back and with some putty, I can come and any of the little pits, there's some pitting in the sheet metal that we ended up sandblasting and treating, I can come back with some filler putty and putty a lot of these little imperfections. This is a show car, this is a lowrider. So it's real important to have this as near perfect as possible. It might not be a lowrider of the year, but it's gonna be a street car, especially it's my car, so I want every square inch of this car to be perfect. So we wanna make sure we get this. Now, a really cool feature of this epoxy primer is if you spray the epoxy primer and you wait the 24 hours, if you do it within 7 days of spraying the epoxy primer, you can actually put body filler or more primer of the same company's brand on the product. So let's say I spray this hood, today's Monday. I come back on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can put filler without sanding the primer. The epoxy primer chemically adheres to the filler. Let's say you need to put 2K primer on this, you don't have to sand anything. You can spray it right on top. It's still chemically open for it. Now, if you say, wow, I sprayed it on Monday, you're gonna run out of that window. You're gonna be like, man, I'm getting close to that 7-day window. Not a big deal. You can mix up another batch, spray another coat of epoxy primer and give you another 7 days. That's a game changer. I haven't found a product on the market that does this. This is one of the reasons I sell this product, one of the reasons I've been using it for years. All right, so it's real critical when you're gonna spray any type of product, primer, color, everything needs to be sanded. So we sanded the majority of this hood up with our DA and a 220 grit, but then we came back and we folded the DA and we made sure we got into all of this by hands. So the biggest thing is you don't wanna leave anything shiny because you're gonna have an issue with delamination. Delamination means that paint's not gonna adhere to it. It's almost like a hard-boiled egg. You boil the eggshell's nice and hard, but the moment you chip it, or you hit it, you impact it, boom, it starts flaking off the egg. That's what delamination is. It means it's there, it looks like it's all there, it sticks well, but the moment you hit it or you do anything to it, it just completely peels off. And that's the best, simplest version I can describe to what delamination is. It's one of the terms we use in the paint world or in the professional world. And that happens for a lot of reasons. You can have adhesion issues where some people, I've seen people online, you know, I sanded this with 220. I've seen people, they sand this, wet sand this, and like, oh man, look at my primer, look at my fenders. It's super flat. They sand it with 800. Oh, 800 is fine. Let's say they sand it with 1,000, 2,000 grit. They do something like that. There's no mechanical adhesion. So you're gonna spray your primer, you're gonna spray your base coat, you're gonna spray your clear. It's gonna look great. And the moment you start pressure washing your car, it gets a little chip, it just starts peeling off like skin. That's delamination. You need to have a mechanical adhesion. So 220 is the mechanical adhesion we're using for this primer. You don't wanna get too fine when it comes to spraying primers, especially epoxy primer. I've shot this epoxy primer over 80 grit scratches, 100 grit scratches. And yeah, you can still see the scratches, but I come back and DA it down and then you have the process. I want that mechanical adhesion to make sure. Now, every project's different. I prefer 100 grit scratches, to be honest with you. In this case, we did 220 because we already had some of this already done, and now we're gonna do it all over again. The biggest thing is to make sure you stay consistent and you keep everything perfect. Prep is key. So now that we have this all done, I'm gonna blow this off. I'm gonna come back with a wax and grease remover, spray a wax and grease remover on this, a solvent wax and grease remover from Southern Polyurethane. And they also make a water-based wax and grease remover. That's the second pass. It's an alcohol base. So that's gonna be really important to take any of the residue that's left behind from the solvent off the bare metal, so we don't have any issues with the primer not adhering to the bare metal. All right, so give you an idea. So on this fender, on both of the fenders in the car, there's no need to put primer on the whole project, like epoxy primer, unless you have a breakthrough. We already did body work, and I'll show you here. So I said earlier, these cars are stamped. Everybody knows that. And then when it comes to the sheet metal, it comes in, curves out, because that's the stress of the stamp. And that's how when you look at these old cars, you look at the fenders and the doors, the fenders kind of bow in and pop out, and then the doors bow out and sink. So in this case, what we ended up doing is cutting all this up, re-welding it, bringing it out, and fillering it. So now when this is bolted onto the car and the fender and the door are perfectly laser straight. Same thing with the door with the quarter panel. So on this one, what I wanted to do is spray some epoxy primer. So we already have 2K primer here. We have previous paint work and then some body work I did. So I want to end up spraying some epoxy primer and everything so we can do a guide coat on this and do the final block stages on this. Maybe we'll end up putting a coat or two of 2K primer on the whole fender. We want to make sure it's laser straight. We have a little bit of body work. We did some rust repair down here. We did all this re-welding. Real important, we ended up sanding this already. But if you notice, there's a little bit of sheen. I know it's hard to see on the camera. Right here, this is not sanded. So I'm just gonna come with my maroon Scotch pad and give this a nice scuff. This whole fender was sanded with 220. And what I wanna do is make sure I give it a couple coats of epoxy primer. So now this epoxy primer, I love this for a lot of reasons. So epoxy primer, you shoot it over bare metal, gives you that rust protection. Second of all, every project I work on, doesn't matter what it is, I put epoxy primer on everything. So this is an original single stage paint job from 1968. The fact that I'm gonna spray epoxy primer on this whole fender protects me from when I start stacking all my solvent, solvent paint on top. I don't run any issues with that solvent bleaching in under the primer and reactivating the single stage and wrinkling it. Now you say, well, man, why don't you strip down the whole fender? And it wasn't in the cards. It's a lot of work. This car has been painted in the single stage. If you guys haven't sanded old school single stage, it is a mission. It gets gummy when it gets heated up. It clogs up your sandpaper. So in this project, it's better off just to leave it like this, strip down as much as we could, and then epoxy primer this. So we're gonna end up epoxy primer. It's gonna protect this old paint job from coming back and causing issues. It's also gonna protect me from seeing any mapping or any discoloration. I use epoxy on everything. I use it on bare metal, I use it on fiberglass, I use it on aluminum, you name it, I use it. And especially everything that Southern Polyurethane offers, because that's what I've been using for the last, I don't know, 13, 14 years, and it's giving me amazing results. It's what I recommend to all my clients. And we've had numerous awards from Lowrider of the Year, Pedal Car of the Year. We have a couple of, and this product has won Concours Elegance. That they're not our clients, but the product speaks for itself, to be honest with you. These guys take a lot of pride. It's made here in the United States, in Georgia, and they know what they're doing. So we're gonna end up spraying all this with epoxy primer just to lock this previous paint job down, and then later let it cure, dry out. I'm gonna come back with a long block, and we're gonna put a guide coat, long block this with most probably like 320, see where we're at, and if there's anything that's questionable, then I'll come back, spray 2K primer on this, and then give it a real nice block. But I blocked this already, and my lines are super straight. So right now we're just gonna go over a little bit of the edges that we kind of miss and get this ready to spray some epoxy primer, and we'll hit it with some wax and grease remover next. All right, so I got the pre-cleaner here that's got a little. So we got the booth on. I don't know if you guys can hear me good. The booth is a little. So one thing I'm not stingy with is pre-cleaner. It's actually, you know, you might say, well, man, it's expensive. But bro, what's gonna be more expensive is having the paint job fail because it's contaminated with silicone, grease. Even the same sweat from your hands will cause issues with the paint not sticking, delaminating, or peeling. So I make sure I clean this up really good and I spray a lot of it. If you guys notice, look, a little dirt. I've already pre-cleaned this hood twice and I'm still getting residue. Another thing too you wanna get is the dust. If you don't take the dust, there's always a little residue of dust that stays behind. If you don't take that dust out, this is gonna actually soften it up, release it to the surface, and then you can pick it up. If you don't take that dust out of that surface, then when you start spraying your primer or paint, a lot of that stuff is sitting on dust. And you're gonna run the risk of that dust not really letting the primer adhere. It's just there, it's in between both, and it's not really adhering to the surface. And that's gonna cause a lot of issues. They're like little steps, man. It's not, I think painting a car is not rocket science. You know, I didn't go to school for this. I got my certifications after the fact. I actually read books, but I was also really, really determined, and I had a passion for classic cars and painting and all that. Plus, when you don't have money, you're the best person you can do is, you have no money but all the time in the world, so you start learning how to do things yourself because you couldn't afford to pay someone else. So that was the story of my life. But I took a lot of pride in what I did. And later on in life, I went and I took the ASC certification, and I got certified in my B2 and B3. That's, I forget which one's which. One is non-structural collision, and the other one's refinishing. There's a lot of stuff you learn in those books, but they're not as practical. At least back then for me, they weren't as practical as what you see in the field. There's stuff that you can have book knowledge, but experience is key. And there's a lot of little tricks I learned from old timers and stuff. Some stuff I wouldn't recommend. Some stuff is like, oh wow, that's pretty smart. One thing I still use to this day is when I'm cleaning stuff or I'm sanding stuff, Comet or Ajax with a maroon Scotch pad and water that has bleach in it. It scrubs, and you'll be surprised how much contaminants I clean with that. But that's still not my final cleaning. That's just one of the process. Because this right now is what will make or break a project. If you don't take the proper steps for this, it's gonna come apart on you. Yeah, I'm sure there's guys out there that do it. You know, I did it at one point too when I was really young and I didn't have the money or the experience rubbing alcohol. But there's not enough solvents for that to release. So I'm not gonna knock it. I started painting my backyard as a kid, and I still paint in my backyard every once in a while. But now I've been in a position to have better tools, better experience, and kind of understanding things working better. So now we just clean this up with a solvent wax and grease remover. I'm using the wax and grease remover from Southern Polyurethane. If you guys notice, everything I use, I keep it in the same system. I use their whole primer system, I use their clears. The only thing that I don't use from them is going to be the colors. The colors we're using is that our color. I have a custom made color I made for this. But I use all their products from beginning to end. So, same thing with the fender. I already sanded the fender with 220. I'm gonna start from the top. And if you notice, I already folded the towel one direction. I have another spare towel in my back pocket. And look at that color. I don't know if you guys can see it from there. Can you see it from there, Manny? Look at that. That's dirt and color coming off. So I'm gonna spray this just with one wipe. Spray this and then do the other fender, but then I'm gonna end up taking a clean napkin that I have in my back pocket and wiping the fender down. Now the last fold. So I'm constantly wiping the you see? Now this is a great example. Come here. We're not going to be putting primer on this fender. Right here. See it? All right. I'm spraying wax and grease remover. Wax and grease remover gives me a surface that I can kind of see the reflection. And I'm here looking at this and there's a little bubble right there. And this was going to get ready for epoxy primer. It's not. This right now is showing me signs of rust. There is a bubble of cancer right here that's pushing through on this paint, and I can see it. And if I just go ahead and put epoxy primer, this bubble is going to come back after this car's painted and is going to haunt me. So something that I thought was ready for epoxy primer, we're not going to even put epoxy primer on it. I'm going to mark this with a pencil. We're going to end up grinding this down to bare metal and seeing what's behind that little bubble. So that tells you how important when you're cleaning your car, you should not just spray and clean. I really believe that you should spray every square inch and look at everything that you're wiping to see, because if you're not careful and you're careless, this would have gone unseen. And I always say all the time, everything is in the details. The devil is in the details. You gotta focus, gotta pay attention, because this would have cost me to redo the whole paint job, because I would have not noticed that little bubble, would have painted this whole project and done. I would have lost all my time. So now I'm gonna still clean the rest of this panel just to check it. I couldn't find my air file, so I ended up just working with this on a flat disc. I think this is 80 grit. And we're gonna use this to file down that spot. It looks like I might have left my air file at home. So we're just gonna use this. All right. So, like I said earlier on, I went to grab my air file, couldn't find it. Looks like I might have left it in my home studio. So I decided to go with my battery operated grinder and a flap disc. And I'm gonna go down on this and see what we have. So let's see what we got here. I wanna start this slow. Clean metal. So there might have been a little black pit that was popping out and pushing it. I'm gonna still open this up a little bit and see how much I got. All right, so obviously we have a lot of background noise. If you guys don't realize, we are in a warehouse. All right, so thank you, Banjo. So we ended up grinding this down, and it looks like it might have been a little black speck. If you ever worked on these old cars, sometimes you can be cleaning everything, and you notice little pinholes, black specks. That is cancer, that is rust. If you don't treat that with acid, with OSPO, you're not gonna get rid of it. You can try to grind it down, but you have to grind it really down to get rid of it because it might be just on the surface. So in this case, I grinded it down, the metal is clean. I don't have anything cancerous or rust. There's nothing behind this to have any rust coming through. And the other side, we ended up stripping it down to bare metal and putting epoxy primer. So this might have been something at one point or another that dented this or maybe chipped the paint or scratched the paint. These fenders have been sitting outside. We are in Miami, Florida. The humidity is crazy. So if I have a scratch, that humidity, rain would eventually start seeping into the paint and getting down to the surface. A lot of these old cars were just painted with lacquer primer and single stage, especially something from the 60s. So it doesn't have that protection like all the new cars now have, E-coating or epoxy primers that really do not let any moisture go down past that barrier. So in this case, we're gonna end up spraying epoxy primer on this, and there's quite a bit of an indentation. We're gonna end up spraying epoxy primer, feathering this out as much as possible, and then putting filler on this to make up the difference in the height of the bare metal and this paint job. So one thing you guys are noticing, I'm doing fewer coats. We have the booth, we have the booth on high, or almost on high. I have it, if you guys notice, the overspray pulls really fast. So there's no overspray going to the cameras, but I like to start doing all my edges first and my cut-ins, and I start trying to do all the small stuff. So right here, I'll try to get in here just to make sure, see the angle of that gun? So I get perfect spray, so the overspray is bouncing into the edge. So as I start doing more of the edges and edges, now there's times that you need to close the nozzle. Right now I have the fan maybe 6 inches, give or take 6 to 5 inches. There's times I'm gonna close the fan, close my material knob, and get far, because there's some stuff you're never gonna get painted. All this in here, I wanna make sure I get enough paint in these edges to get the best coverage when it comes to protection from rust or any moisture. You don't want to put any base coat on bare metal. So this is one of the extra steps I start taking. But remember, don't always try to keep your fan always open. Sometimes you have to close it if you get into all the tight cracks. I wanted to explain a little bit. So on this is the first coat, but if you guys notice, you saw how many coats I gave it. I closed the material knob down. I don't want to spray this like 2K primer. You don't want to pound this on. The thinner the coats, excuse me, the thinner the coats, the better. It's gonna be, look how nice and smooth the surface is. I don't want to have a lot of orange peel, so I want to get this as smooth as possible so later I can come back, sand it with 320 or whatever the case is. But the biggest thing is to give this enough of an atomization so it lays out real nice and smooth and I get amazing coverage. Because I can pound this on faster, but then you run the risk of, like I said earlier, solvent pop, and the solvent pop almost looks like fisheye. You start getting craters, you don't want to do that. So thinner coats on the first coats is better. And then as I get on to like the second coat or third coat, I start kind of building it up a little bit, and I'll open the material knob and give it a little bit more material. But in this case, I really did not need a lot. I just needed enough to give me some protection from the bare metal. Now I'll come back and spray the areas that I know that we had a lot of bare metal and come back and protect that. And I'm gonna open the material knob just a hair. Get this one spot that I missed here, but the biggest thing I wanted to show you guys, this is so if you grab and come in close, you'll see, come in close, record the texture. All right, one of the biggest things is that if you guys noticed, look how wet and smooth that is. Even though it still has the imperfections of the metal underneath the rust, that's how I want to see when you spray epoxy sealer. You want that really nice silky finish. You don't want to have a lot of orange peel. You don't want to have a lot of dullness to it. This is what you want, so later when you come back and sand it, it's very easy to sand, and then when you start shooting your base coat on top of it, it looks even better. So this is one of the reasons why I shoot with such a tight fan and I don't pound down the material, because I want to stack up my coats little by little to get the best results and finish on it. You want your primers to start looking like your epoxy primer, you want it to look like single stage. This is one of the reasons I use SPI. It's very reflective. The same way you see it, it starts to dry down a little bit and it still stays like a single stage. It's really easy for me to see imperfections and dents. Plus you want this to lay out like this because it's gonna give you a final result. It's gonna be a lot easier for you to achieve the final result that you're looking for. All right, so you saw in the booth I was talking about the Caprice and the Fender. So this is the 68 Caprice, my personal car, one of my personal cars. I have a couple of cars here. So On this project, the big thing I was talking about was the fender. How the fender bows in and then the door bows in, and that's how these cars were made from factory. You know, remember, these cars are all stamped. Even cars back then and cars now, they're not always perfect. So the biggest thing for me was I ended up hammering all this out, dollying it, and the same thing with the fender. I had to cut it up, release some of the stress to bring out that sheet metal, and then we ended up putting it back together, putting filler. I put filler on the whole door, and then I came back with the die grinder, cut this all up, and blocked it across to make sure it was perfect. So when the car is all assembled, this door goes perfectly straight right into the fender. Same thing with the quarter panel. The quarter panel has back here, I don't know if you guys are gonna see it, I might be out of shot. This quarter panel, Manny, am I still in shot on that camera? Yes. Oh, okay, cool. So on this quarter panel from factory, when it got pressed, it comes in, it dips in a little bit and it comes right back out. Same thing, the door comes in and curves a little bit. So what we ended up doing is we ended up pulling this out, we ended up blocking all this out, hammering it out, filing it down to make sure that this door goes straight. Now, it's not gonna go completely straight because this quarter panel bows in a little bit and then bows right back out very little. So what I ended up doing is bringing this out as much as possible. So you still have a little bit of that soft because it bows a little bit out right here. It's a muscle car, it's from 68. So there's a little bit of a bow, and if I would have made this completely straight, it would have ruined the lines of this car. So I ended up making sure I got rid of that indentation. I made sure I got rid of that dent that was from factory, and we ended up fixing that and bringing this door skin out. So you have this nice, settle, smooth curve, and then it meets the door jamb, and then it curves back out straight into the fender. So this is the project that we're working on. That hood is the hood for this car, and this is the color. If you guys haven't seen this car, we ended up redoing all the electrical, and we put a modern electrical system with relays. We already have the roof flaked out in pattern, so we're doing the project little by little. This is the next step I want to end up doing, is fixing up the front clip, making sure everything's perfect to get this car ready to put in this nice, beautiful custom magenta color that I made for this car. So this is my 68 Caprice lowrider that causes so many headaches. I still gotta do the electrical, I still gotta bleed the brakes. Dude, the steering wheel's cracked. You know, these cars with time, they end up cracking. So it's always a process, but when you love these cars, you do anything for them. Cool.